Hi and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to build another SFF PC using this DeepCool CH170 Digital White. You can buy this for 4,200 pesos or around $72 US. If you bundle it with its tempered glass, it will cost you 4,950 pesos or around $85 US, roughly at the same price point as the old NR200P. As for the specs and as compared to the NR200P and CH160, all cases are ITX only compatible. The max cooler height of both CH160 and CH170 is 172mm, and I think this is to fit the Assassin 4 cooler. With its big cooler compatibility, it comes with less GPU compatibility at 305mm in length. It can also fit an ATX PSU but at the expense of the GPU length. As for fan mounts, while it looks similar to the CH160, the side fan mounts for me are pretty much unusable with big coolers, and this is also based on experience. There are no pre-installed fans, and the disk drive mounts are pretty much unusable if you plan to install a fan at the top. And since the length is just 250mm, the desk area is just 500cm squared. That's 25% less desk space as compared to the CH160 and NR200P. So personally, it felt significantly smaller than the CH160 even though it isn't that smaller. So upon opening, you'd see the case already padded by a foam. So it is covered by a plastic bag. So you'll notice here that if I remove this side, this is basically just a CH160, and this is actually not oriented in this way but actually in this way. So it's in a vertical layout. So around it, there's no cutouts for the motherboard and GPU. But underneath, there's the cutout for the motherboard and the GPU. This is a USB for the digital portion. So for I/O ports, there's a power button, two USB 3, one USB-C, and an audio jack. So I guess the first step is to remove these screws. So there are 4 of those. So this one can pop off. This is the bottom part of the case. So if you look at this, is basically just the CH160 without the handle on the top. So next is to remove the side panel, which can be pulled. So for this one, since the screws are already removed, you just need to pull this and then remove the top panel by removing 4 screws, 2 on each side. Although it's not in the manual, you also obviously need to remove the radiator bracket. Oh, I forgot to remove the top panel. Just pop this off. Inside there's a dust filter. This is for this side. Then there's a bunch of cables. So first is the USB 3, USB-C, front panel audio, front panel switches, and this tail again. So I'm saying it as again because this is the same concept from the CH160. So there are zip ties. Not really sure what this is, but based on the manual, it says that this is a fan bracket. And then of course a bunch of screws. So anyway, moving on. So these are my components. So this is my 7800X3D with the G.Skill RAM B650E-I motherboard. What's different is the cooler. So I used the same cooler as what I used in CH160. This is the AK620, if I remember correctly. And I reoriented the fans to go that way. So when I mount it, if I mount it this way, it will go that way, which means that it will go up. So I actually wanted to route this PSU cable behind the motherboard, but it will not fit because of this railing here. So much for that. So there are some cables here, which good to install now. So for the front panel audio, it's this way. Anyway, I find it hard to work in this manner. I'll remove this bottom panel first. So it's secured by 1 screw here and then 1 screw here. Should give us more room. So plug in the USB-C, USB 3. So the fan is fighting a bit. So I removed it first. Then plug the USB-C. And then the front panel switch. Then plug back this fan. So let's screw the motherboard to the case. So as for the PSU, I'll be using this FSP Flex Guru Dagger 850 watts gold power supply. Anyway, it's best first to plug the cables. So there's the CPU and of course the motherboard. So once it's there, use the typical PSU screws. So I really like these cutouts here. So this is small details that I like, so that when you put in your screwdriver, it's just right. So imagine if this is blocked, it will be hard to screw. Mash the cables there. So of course, don't forget to turn on your PSU, then plug this tail. So as for the fans, I'll use 2 fans, one in the bottom and one at the top. So what I'll do first is to plug this splitter. And of course, plug the fan to the fan splitter. So for this side of the case, remove these two screws here. So this is the so-called multi-function bracket. So you can plug in SSD and hard disk drive here. But for me, I'll use it for the fan, which will go like so. So it will be like this. Then screw this back. And of course, plug this fan to the fan splitter. So next is to remove these two PCIe covers in preparation for GPU installation. So as for the GPU, I'll be using the Gigabyte RTX 4070 Ti Super Gaming OC. So I hope I can just plug this while mashing everything. Yes, this is to clear it up here first. Clear up for the GPU as much as you can. Just slot it in. I think it's slotted in now. Then just screw the GPU baffle to the case. And of course, plug the 12VH power. For this, I think it's best to secure this first. Then for these cables, right, can actually... Oh, so one of the cables went behind. So best is to tie these cables together with a zip tie or something similar. Okay, so that part is done. At this point, you might want to test this build first, plug in the power supply and everything before you close the case. And yeah, I think I'll do that first. Okay, so I tested it out. It works. And I think it's time to close everything. First, the top panel first. Plus the plug is this USB, the motherboard.
As for the temps while benchmarking Cinebench R23 for 30 minutes, the CPU temps averaged at 86.5 degrees Celsius with the AIO, and it's just 0.1 degrees Celsius difference between intake and exhaust. With air cooling, the temps averaged at 88.19 degrees Celsius in intake mode and 88.63 degrees Celsius in exhaust mode. This is around 0.42 degrees Celsius difference. In this scenario, AIO is definitely better. However, the leader of the pack here is still CH160. And with AIO, the temps are not bad and at par with the mesh rooms. With Cinebench R24, the story is pretty much similar. The AIOs averaged at 82.27 degrees Celsius to 82.63 degrees Celsius, with the intake mode being slightly cooler. And the air cooler is around 1 degree Celsius hotter as compared to the AIO. Again, the top here is still CH160, and the temps are comparably not that bad. As for FF15 in 4K for 30 minutes, the CPU temps for an AIO intake config is at 66.33 degrees Celsius, and it is 3.21 degrees Celsius cooler as compared to its exhaust counterpart. That's quite significant. The story is different with the air cooling, as upwards or exhaust air config is at 67.96 degrees Celsius, and it is 2 degrees Celsius cooler as compared to the intake or downward air config. This is the chart where you'll see a config that is cooler and at par with the CH160. With GPU temps, the story is different. The exhaust AIO config is at 66.15 degrees Celsius, and it is now 3.04 degrees Celsius as compared with its intake config. The air cooling config is somewhat tied at 67.6 degrees Celsius. Again, as compared to the CH160, this is at par with the exhaust config, but other CH170 configs are quite hotter.
So as for thermals, I think it is quite bad in air cooling as compared to the CH160. One possible reason is the fan configuration. So I tried it going upwards, so the fan blows to the top and exhaust it here. And I also tried an intake mode, so it will get the air from the top to this cooler and to the bottom. So the problem here is that this bottom is basically blocked. So 3 sides of this case is blocked, and the only way to get the air to the case is from the back side, which is very limited in my opinion, as compared to the CH160 where it is pretty much unblocked. Furthermore, I noticed that the GPU's air are trapped here, so it did not help the GPU as well. So it's trapped on this side and on the other side. So these are vertically oriented fin stacks. So the air will definitely blow here. And sadly, it wasn't enough for the air to be absorbed by the exhaust fan here. As compared to the CH160, right? The CH160 is oriented horizontally. So the air from the GPU will blow upwards directly to the exhaust
all of the hot air here will be blown out directly to the exhaust. So I think they could have made it a bit better for air config.
But given that, it is not that bad in terms of gaming and CPU load testing. Acceptable, but again, just measurably hotter than the CH160. Not a chart topper, but definitely middle of the pack. One thing that you might want to avoid if your focus is gaming is the air cooling in downwards config, since it didn't perform that well in both CPU and GPU temps. As for my personal config recommendation, that will be the AIO in exhaust config, as I would usually prioritize GPU over CPU temperatures. Although given that, I'll retain the CPU intake config in the charts moving forward. This is a good representation of the case's performance.
So as to what I like in this case, first is this thing here, the so-called digital. So I like it because it makes kind of sense. So instead of wasting this space here as a simple white spacer, they made it something functional or something visually appealing. Maybe I'll call it visually appealing rather than functional. But to some, maybe this is really functional. So I like this. It's not really a gimmick at this point. However, if you want to remove the panels of this case, you have to flip it on this side, I guess on this side. You have to flip it on this side. And then of course, you have to remove the screws. Remove this stand here or remove this base here. And then that's the only time you can remove the side panels. So it's quite of a hassle to maintain in my opinion.
But overall, I'm happy with this case and I'd recommend. It's a desk saver as compared to the CH160, not as tall as the Fractal Mood. It is cheaper than the NR200P, and the aesthetics for me is just right thanks to its usable gimmick on its stand. The temp performance is just at the middle, which is okay in my opinion. Lastly for me, DeepCool gives the impression that they test their cases thoroughly, and I hope to see more of this in the future. Anyway, that's it for this video. Do let me know in the comments below on what you think of this case. Thanks for watching. Do like or dislike and subscribe for more unboxing, SFF builds, and benchmarks. Bye!
So I'm saying again because this is basically the same design from the CH. I'm saying this same